Hey there, viewers. When a legal defense cracks, it's usually behind closed doors, quiet, strategic, rehearsed. But not this time. Diddy's lead attorney didn't just withdraw, he vanished before opening statements, leaving the courtroom stunned and the prosecution circling. What happened next? Let's just say, some things were never meant to be heard. Let's get into it. Chapter 1. The Whisper in the Elevator. The morning air outside the courthouse didn't feel right. It was too still, like the city had agreed to pause for something terrible. The sidewalks were quiet except for the occasional shout from or the nervous shuffle of shoes behind me. The usual chaos of New York, horns, laughter, chatter, was muffled, like someone had pressed a pillow over the city's mouth. I gripped the strap of my bag and stepped toward the glass doors. I'd been here once before, months ago during a pre-trial hearing. Back then it had been loud, reporters everywhere, security swarming like ants over a dropped lollipop. But today, it was different. Everyone was here, but nobody knew what to say, as if we were all waiting for something that hadn't quite arrived. I flashed my ID and the laminated guest badge they'd mailed me. The guard barely glanced at it before waving me through the first checkpoint. He didn't even pretend to smile. The scanner beeped. Another officer, tall and stiff-jawed, nodded for me to move along. No words, not even the usual "have a good day." Just silence, heavy and humid. The elevator was open when I got there, like it had been waiting for me. I stepped in alone. My heels made soft clicks on the fake marble floor. I reached for the button to level 3, gallery seating, and as I did, a hand darted in from behind, catching the door just before it closed. She stepped in like a shadow, thin, older, dressed in a dark gray coat too thick for spring. No badge, no purse, just a bundle of folded paper in one hand, the other clutched around a rosary with cracked wooden beads. We didn't speak at first. The doors closed. I pressed the button for 3. The elevator began to rise. Then somewhere between floors, she leaned in. Close, too close. Her breath smelled faintly of lavender and metal. "He won't speak today," she whispered, her lips barely moving. The mouthpiece ran. I blinked, "Excuse me." But she had already stepped back. And then, before I could ask again, before I could turn to face her fully, the elevator dinged. Level 3. The doors slid open. And she was gone. Not behind me, not in the hallway, just gone. I turned back into the elevator in a rush of confusion, but it was empty. The light blinked softly above the door. No signs of other passengers, no echo of her footsteps. I stepped into the hallway, heart racing. Did a woman just get off before me? I asked the nearest officer by the gallery checkpoint. He glanced up, frowning. "What woman?" She was in the elevator with me, short gray coat. She had rosary beads. He shook his head. "You came up alone, ma'am. Elevator cameras show one person." I wanted to argue, but my tongue felt heavy, like it knew something my mind didn't. The hallway stretched before me like a dream, sterile walls, flickering lights, a low hum of tension rising with each footstep. The courtroom doors loomed at the end, already cracked open. Inside, I could hear the shuffle of seats, the metallic clatter of press equipment being adjusted, and faint whispers that died before they reached the ceiling. I found my seat on the left gallery rail, 4th row, reserved for the families of the accusers. There were others, a few familiar faces, women I'd shared coffee with during support group meetings, a man I recognized from last December's vigil. We nodded at one another, but no one smiled. Not even the tight-lipped, polite kind, just solemn eyes and clenched jaws. Then the screens started to flicker. The courtroom monitors, The big ones that usually showed case numbers and daily updates glitched. Instead of today's docket, the words RECLIBRATING flashed in stuttered gray font. People glanced at each other. Someone in the press row muttered something about a server reboot. The judge's clerk tapped at a keyboard, frowned, and turned to the IT staff. I took out the printed trial program they'd handed us at the checkpoint. One of those glossy pamphlets, the kind they hand out at school orientations or graduation ceremonies. Big letters, United STATESVs, COMBS. Below it, pictures of each legal team. Black and white headshots, neatly labeled. I scanned the defense page. There he was, lead counsel. Jack. The face was unmistakable. Square jaw, slick back hair, expensive smile. I remembered seeing him on TV, standing outside the courthouse after one of the preliminary hearings, saying things like, "Mr. Combs is confident the truth will clear his name." Only now, his face on the page had been scribbled over. Jagged lines, pen strokes thick and angry. I stared at it, chilled. Because I hadn't done that. I flipped the page, nothing else was marked. No ink stains on my hands, no pen visible in my bag's side pouch. I turned to the woman sitting beside me, a middle-aged lady with deep lines around her eyes, her hands trembling in her lap. "Did you mark this?" I asked, holding up the page. She looked, then shook her head. "No, mine's clean." I checked again. The pen marks looked old, faded as if they'd been there for hours, like they'd been printed that way. Up front, someone called for an order. The judge entered, robes flowing like dark smoke. We stood. The court deputy announced the case. And then came the part I didn't expect. All parties rise. The defense will be addressed pending substitution of counsel. Whispers broke out instantly. The phrase didn't register in my brain at first. Substitution of counsel, what did that mean? The prosecutor's side exchanged quiet, stiff glances. The assistant DA tilted her head like she hadn't been warned either. The judge sighed. There's been a development this morning. The lead defense attorney for the accused, Mr., has withdrawn representation effective immediately. The court has been informed that this decision was made within the last 12 hours, and Mr. Combs has yet to appoint new counsel. As such, proceedings are delayed pending clarification. A low wave of gasps rolled through the courtroom like wind through dry leaves. I felt it again. The same chill as the elevator. The woman's words. The mouthpiece ran. I wasn't imagining it. I couldn't be. A few rows ahead, one of the who'd somehow gotten gallery seating shouted, "Justice is coming," before being gently escorted out by two marshals. And suddenly all of it, the silence outside, the tension, the flickering screens, it made a twisted kind of sense. Something was wrong. Not just a little wrong, deeply wrong. You could feel it settling into the bones of the room, humming in the spaces between words. The air felt too thin, too heavy all at once, like it didn't want to be breathed. I looked down at my hands and realized I'd been gripping the program too hard. The paper was creased, my knuckles white. My heartbeat pounded in my ears, slow and deliberate. The bailiff gave instructions. We would reconvene after lunch, maybe. The judge would allow time for Diddy's team to present a plan, if one existed. But I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't a scheduling issue. This was collapse. The kind that starts quiet. The kind that starts with a whisper in a metal elevator and ends with chaos behind closed courtroom doors. I stood with the others as the gallery emptied. But I stayed behind just a moment longer. I looked back at the defense bench, empty now, cold under the harsh lights. The chair where was supposed to sit was still slightly pushed out, like someone had risen in a hurry. And there on the floor beneath it lay something small. I stepped closer, ignoring the voice of the usher urging us to leave. It was a single page, torn face down. I picked it up. Typed letters. A resignation notice. Unsigned, unstamped, but dated that morning. I slid it into my pocket. And just like that, the silence returned. Chapter 2, the nameplate that fell. I don't know why my hands kept shaking. I'd sat in that same courtroom a dozen times during pre-trial hearings, through procedural delays, through through the red tape and scripted objections. But today something felt split down the middle, like the marble beneath my shoes was already cracking before the judge even stepped inside. There was too much stillness for a room so crowded. Not silence. No, there were sounds, but they felt staged. Muted coughs, the forced rustle of papers, the occasional scratch of a pen across a legal pad. Even the defense table had the weight of absence to it, as if people were pretending not to look at the one chair left conspicuously empty. That chair, it sat like a wound in the room, slick black leather, unoccupied and gleaming under the harsh courthouse lights. You'd think no one would notice a missing man in a trial like this. But somehow everyone noticed and no one said a word. The media cameras were already rolling behind us, their lenses twitching like hungry insects, desperate for movement, for a whisper of disruption. But the disruption was right there, right in front of us. The seat meant for Diddy's lead attorney, Mr., was vacant. The nameplate confirmed it. His polished brass nameplate, the one I remembered seeing during every past hearing with a smug permanence, was lying on the tile floor, cracked clean through the center like it had been dropped, or split. A court clerk picked it up as discreetly as she could, but not before I caught the way her fingers hesitated when she touched it, like it might burn. She passed it to a bailiff, and they exchanged a few short words I shouldn't have heard, but I was already leaning in, already anticipating something would fracture today. I caught the words, "No show," last-minute filing, and most terrifying of all, spoken in a voice like the edge of a blade, protective reassignment. Protective, that word twisted in my stomach like old rope. Who was being protected, him or us? No one made an announcement. The clerk didn't return to the bench. The bailiff didn't look at the gallery. It was as if the courtroom itself was trying to smother the question before it could be asked. I scanned the room again. Diddy was there, of course, seated between two newer faces, junior attorneys maybe, but they looked lost like interns on their first day of school. He wasn't handcuffed, he never was, but something in his posture had shifted. He wasn't lounging the way he used to. No showboating, no performative smugness. He just sat still, almost too still. His eyes didn't move. Not toward us, not toward the door, not toward the empty chair where should been. It was as if his whole presence had become quiet. There was a ripple in the gallery. People weren't talking loudly, but the tension had broken enough to allow cautious murmurs to fill the space. A woman behind me whispered into her phone. Another man shifted his tablet in his lap, glancing down at a blinking notification. I turned just in time to see a screen light up, Twitter. A post, still fresh. I could barely make it out, but the words were unmistakable even in peripheral blur. Breaking, Diddy's top defense attorney just resigned. Before opening statements, case imploding. It was from someone inside. A clerk, from the looks of it, a junior one. I recognized the handle. He'd posted blurry selfies from the courthouse stairwell before, but this wasn't a joke. This wasn't a leak of court lunch menus or docket delay screenshots. This was real. He, Quit, had walked out. The man who'd postured through every pre-trial motion, who built his name dismantling witnesses and smirking at press conferences. He was gone. The weight of it settled slowly over the room. You could feel it, this collective. Reporters adjusted their microphones. The stenographer paused mid-keystroke. The junior defense lawyers leaned in and whispered to each other, their hands shaking slightly as they flipped through binders with too many post-it flags. Even the court artist, seated just across the aisle, stopped sketching and instead began drawing the empty chair. It wasn't just that the attorney was absent. It was the timing, just before opening statements. Just before the world was meant to hear the formal words that would define this trial, frame the evidence, the charges, the pain. There was no delay filing in the record, no continuance granted, just a man-sized hole where a defense strategy used to be. I found myself thinking back, scrolling through old memories like faded photographs of the way Diddy had interacted during earlier hearings. At first, it had seemed like posturing, glances that never quite met, long pauses before whispered sidebars. The way would sometimes clench his jaw when Diddy spoke out of turn or ignored a cue. Now it all clicked. There had been friction, but it wasn't until this moment that the full scale of the collapse became visible. It was like watching a dam crack. Quiet at first, a hairline fracture along the stone. But now we were hearing the first rumbles, the groan of pressure building behind years of lies, leverage, money, and manipulation. And it had just begun to buckle. Across the gallery, I caught sight of my aunt, my cousin's mother, her hands folded so tightly in her lap that her knuckles had gone white. Her lips moved silently. I didn't need to hear the words. I knew she was praying, not for vengeance, not even for justice, just for truth, for something to finally hold. But it was the faces of the officials that struck me next. The prosecutors looked steady, sure, not triumphant, not gloating, but prepared. It was the security personnel that looked strange. Two marshals at the side door were stiff, unusually so. One had a radio pressed to his shoulder for far longer than necessary. They weren't looking at the defense table. They were watching the audience, like they expected something to happen, or someone to walk in who never would. And then there was the monitor. Every courtroom has one big flat screens mounted for evidence display. They usually show docket numbers, exhibit slides, video testimonies. But right now, the one in front of me flickered, just once. A brief pulse of static. Then instead of the expected display of case number 11,871 Fed v. Combs, it flashed a different message. I blinked, thinking I imagined it, but others saw it too. Someone gasped near the aisle. RECALIBRATING. The word appeared in white text across a black background, like a loading screen from some old computer game. Then it vanished, replaced by the docket again. But I'd seen it. So had a few others. And the silence that followed wasn't the quiet of waiting. It was the quiet of people realizing they had no idea what was about to happen next. I turned to my program, the official court-issued document listing the timeline of the day, the list of charges, and the legal teams on both sides. I hadn't looked at it earlier, too preoccupied with the whisper in the elevator, the strange woman who'd vanished between floors. But now I needed something tangible, something printed and firm. When I opened the page listing Diddy's defense team, my breath caught in my throat. The photo of the team was there, 6 people in suits standing side by side, arms folded, the kind of stock photo used for legal marketing. But one face had been scribbled over, not printed that way. Scribbled, in blue pen, harsh, jagged lines cutting through the face of. I hadn't done it. I hadn't even opened the program until now. And yet there it was, ink still fresh. I touched it, half expecting the page to be warm. My hands began to tremble again. This was more than a resignation. This was a fracture in the performance. The mask had slipped. The courtroom was supposed to be a machine, a well-oiled, slow-moving, meticulous machine. But now something had jammed in its gears. Someone had quit. Someone who, by all accounts, shouldn't have. Not today, not like this. I kept watching the door, waiting for the judge, waiting for someone to explain. But part of me knew that the explanation wouldn't be clear. Not yet. Not in this room. The truth would dribble out slowly, through cracks in social media, through leaked court memos, through whispers like the one I'd heard in that elevator. And finally, when the judge entered, the tension didn't lift. It shifted, hardened. "All rise," the bailiff called out. We did. Wooden seats scraped backward, papers rustled, people adjusted. The judge took his seat. "The court acknowledges the filing of a motion to withdraw submitted by counsel for the defense," he said. His voice was unreadable. No dramatic pause, no inflection. Just a statement etched in stone. "No reason has been formally provided to this court at this time. Until further notice, the defendant will proceed with counsel of record." There was no gasp, no objection, just a moment of silence, the kind that echoes in your chest. The kind that says the real trial was never about what we expected. The kind that says something deeper just broke. Chapter 3, What the Jury Wasn't Supposed to Hear. By the time I stepped out into the courthouse hallway, I could feel the tension crawling under my skin like static before a storm. People were moving, but not in any purposeful rhythm. Some paced in small loops. Others stood near walls pretending to scroll on their phones while sneaking glances at the courtroom doors. No one wanted to say it out loud, but the silence left behind by that empty seat at the defense table was heavier than most verdicts. I leaned against the cold marble of a column near the gallery entrance, trying to process everything: the fallen nameplate, the sudden announcement, the judge's unreadable face as he confirmed what we were all starting to suspect. Diddy's lead attorney hadn't just stepped away. He'd vanished. Officially, it was a motion to withdraw. But the way the judge delivered it, eyes scanning the courtroom like he was looking for something just out of reach, I knew this wasn't routine. People don't quit federal trials like this. Not without a reason. Not unless they've seen something they weren't supposed to. A cough startled me sharp and raspy from just over my shoulder. I turned to see a woman I hadn't noticed before. Her coat was wrinkled, a scarf tugged tight around her neck like it was the only thing holding her together. Her eyes were bloodshot, and I saw the same look I'd seen in the mirror too many mornings, grief trying to wear a brave face. She introduced herself as her niece was one of the victims. Not my cousin, not part of our group, but tied to this trial just the same. We shared that look, the one that doesn't need explanations. She didn't ask if I believed the stories. That part was assumed. What she said instead made my skin prickle. "The lawyer didn't just quit," she whispered, eyes flicking left and right like someone might be listening. "He ran." Before I could ask what she meant, she pulled out her phone, opened her telegram, showed me a photo. It looked blurry at first, grainy, low-lit, but there was no mistaking the face. Diddy's lead attorney snapped just outside the courthouse service exit, shirt half untucked, tie crumpled in his fist, eyes wide like he'd just stepped out of a nightmare. He wasn't walking, he was sprinting. Behind him, just visible at the edge of the frame, were two figures. No badges, no uniforms, but wearing the kind of posture that tells you they carry authority like a weapon. Tapped the screen and zoomed in on the attorney's face. "He saw something," she said. "Something that made him break contract hours before federal trial. You don't run like that unless you're being chased, and not just by people." I stared at the image, trying to anchor my thoughts. It didn't make sense. How does a man with that much control, that much power, lose it all in one night? What could possibly shake him that bad? But I didn't have time to ask. The courtroom doors reopened. Bailiffs called us back in. Gave me a tight nod and folded her phone away like it was radioactive. We shuffled inside, quieter than before, a kind of collective breath being held. When I sat down, the energy in the room had shifted again. Gone was the forced patience of earlier. Now everything felt brittle. On the defense bench, a younger attorney, one of the juniors I'd barely noticed during pre-trial coverage, was speaking in hushed tones to the judge. I couldn't hear everything, but the tone said enough. He wasn't ready. The judge didn't budge. "The court will not delay opening proceedings further," he said. "We proceed as scheduled." No sympathy, just protocol. The junior attorney's face tightened, but he nodded. He didn't have a choice. The courtroom murmurs hadn't yet died down when it happened. On the gallery monitor, a screen usually reserved for visual exhibits, a folder popped open on its own. A plain system window, file list, one item, audio EXH B4 REDACTED. There was a beat like the room itself had paused. Then the file started playing. The first voice was the lead attorney. His tone was controlled but strained, like someone trying to contain panic beneath professionalism. "You didn't tell me about the safe room," he said. "You didn't say anything about the tiles." A second voice, deeper, calm, not Diddy, but someone else. "It wasn't relevant," the man said. "It's not admissible, it's not something we disclose." Then the attorney again. You knew what was under there. You had me walk through it like it was nothing. I saw," static cut the sentence. Then silence. Then the sound of breathing. The unknown voice replied, softer now, almost curious. "Do you see them now, even with the lights on?" And then the words that made my chest clench. The attorney, his voice trembling, whispered, "There's something living beneath the spa tiles. It's not just blood, it's watching." A woman in the gallery gasped. One of the jurors flinched so hard her pen clattered to the ground. The judge slammed his gavel 3 times, shouting over the echoes, "Clerk, kill the file, kill it now." The screen went black. Chaos didn't explode, it crept, like fog rolling in, replacing clarity with confusion. Some people were still processing what they heard, others pretending they didn't. The court reporters looked paralyzed. The judge leaned in, whispering to his assistant with sharp, angry movements. The prosecutor stood halfway, uncertain whether to speak or wait for the gavel again. I didn't move, I couldn't. I just stared at the blank monitor, the ghost of that voice still ringing in my ears. "It's watching." Who says that in a legal strategy meeting? Who even uses language like that? This wasn't courtroom jargon. This wasn't evidence tampering or obstruction. This was fear, raw and metaphysical. This was something no federal proceeding could contain. A few seats over, I saw one of the jurors scribbling furiously in her notepad, hand shaking so hard it made the paper rattle. She looked up, caught me watching her, then quickly lowered her gaze. The judge stood and ordered an immediate recess. "This courtroom is in recess until tomorrow morning. All shared media exhibits are to be purged and reset under court supervision. No exceptions." The gallery emptied in silence, like mourners leaving a wake. I walked out slower this time, watching the backs of people instead of their faces. Some kept whispering into their phones, others just stared straight ahead. Nobody laughed. Nobody speculated. For the first time since this trial began, it felt like we weren't watching a case unfold. We were watching something unravel. I made it down to the lobby before checking my phone. One new airdrop, no sender, just a single file, transcript format. Title, Interview 11, Witness J. Baldwin. I didn't open it right away. My thumb hovered over the notification. Something about it felt loaded, like once I opened it, I wouldn't be able to unsee whatever it said. My phone buzzed again, someone calling my name from across the hall, one of our legal advocates. I closed the screen and tucked the phone into my coat. Later that night in my apartment, with the city humming outside and the windows shut tight, I finally opened it. The transcript was short, but the name at the top, the witness, J. Baldwin, I recognized it. An old name, someone from the inner circle once rumored to have disappeared after a scandal in 2020. Not a public face, but someone who had been there. The opening line made my blood run cold. He said the mirrors were two-way, but not from the other side of the glass, from the other side of the skin. That was all I could read before I dropped the phone. Chapter 4. Witnesses go missing one by one. The courthouse was quieter than usual that morning. The kind of quiet that didn't feel like peace. It felt like dread folded in on itself. No bailiff barking orders, no reporters shoving mics through metal barriers, no buzzing lights or fluttering papers. Just the hollow click of my own heels on the polished floor as I walked toward the gallery and felt the walls closing in. The trial was supposed to resume at 9:00 a.m. sharp, but by 9:17 the lights in the courtroom hadn't even been turned on. The jury hadn't been brought in. The judge's seat remained empty. It was as if the courtroom itself was holding its breath, unsure whether to exhale or scream. At first, they told us it was a scheduling miscommunication, that the defense needed a few hours to adjust after the previous lead attorney's sudden departure. But something was off. People weren't just late, they were missing. Not just the legal team, witnesses, court staff, people whose names were on the docket and faces I'd seen during the pretrial hearings. There were whispers, subtle glances, gaps in the gallery where family members of other victims had sat every day without fail. Today, those seats were empty, and nobody was saying why. I stepped into the hallway to call my aunt, my cousin's mother, and before I could press the dial button, my phone buzzed with a message from my friend Casey, the one who worked for an online paper. She'd been feeding me what little the press wasn't publishing, using access I wasn't supposed to know she had. This time, it wasn't just a text. It was screenshots. Blurry, cropped, but unmistakably real. They were from a law enforcement signal board, one of those internal platforms where agencies coordinate on high-risk protective logistics. The top of the screen read, "Urgent, witness tracking alert." Below it were the names of two witnesses I recognized from the pretrial list. One had been a live-in contractor, the other a former booking manager. Both had been set to testify about Diddy's alleged behavioral patterns and control methods, the kind of testimony that could establish a larger pattern. But now the notes were chilling. One read, "Protective detail unable to make contact, last check-in missed, room empty, no forced entry." The other said, "Reported suspicious activity at hotel, surveillance cameras disabled, hotel room raided, witness status unconfirmed." I felt my breath snag. For a moment I couldn't tell if it was anxiety or something worse clawing its way up my throat. I leaned against the wall, trying not to think of the worst-case scenario. But the timing wasn't a coincidence. People like this don't just vanish. Not after preparing for months to testify. Not when they're under federal protection, unless someone made them vanish. The trial was postponed for the day. Officially, they said it was due to logistical strain on witness transportation. But I saw the way the clerks avoided eye contact. I saw the defense team whispering in huddles, one of them gripping a file so tightly it bent in the middle. Whatever was happening, they weren't ready for it, and neither were we. I left the building sometime past noon and walked toward the memorial just across the street. Families and supporters had arranged photos, candles, and flowers near the fountain. A vigil of sorts, even though no one used that word. No one wanted to admit it felt like mourning. Not just for those we'd already lost, but for the truth we might never get to speak out loud. That's where I met her. She didn't say her name. She just stood beside me at the row of flickering candles, her hand trembling slightly as she adjusted one of the photo frames. I'd seen the face in the picture before. He was one of the stylists, if I remembered right. Early 20s, wide smile gone too soon. She glanced at me sideways and said, "You?" I nodded. Then she leaned in closer and whispered, "I was subpoenaed last year, got the paper and everything, never called in." Her voice barely cracked above the wind. "You know why?" I shook my head. She looked me dead in the eye, because I saw what happened to the ones who agreed. There was no drama in her tone, no theatrical flair, just dead certainty. She pulled her coat and walked off before I could ask anything more. I called my mother to check in, just to hear a voice I trusted. But even that call felt surreal, like I was phoning in from another world, where time passed differently and fear had a physical weight to it. I didn't mention the screenshots or the missing witnesses. Not yet. What was the point of sharing a storm if we were all already drowning? Later that evening, our family group chat started lighting up. My cousin dropped a series of screenshots. Someone had recorded an Instagram story from one of the witnesses who had recently gone silent. The story had been deleted, of course, but not before someone captured it. The video was short, maybe 3 seconds, just a mirror, a cracked bathroom tile, the reflection of a face half covered by wet hair, and under the eye, a single red mark drawn in eyeliner or something else. A curve with a tiny cross through it, like a symbol, maybe a warning. The caption said, "I can't unsee it." Nobody knew what it meant, not exactly, but something in my gut twisted so hard I had to sit down. I stared at the screenshots for what felt like hours. There was something in that image, something not visible but present. You ever feel like a photo is looking back at you? That night I didn't sleep. I kept hearing things, not voices exactly, but shuffles in the hallway, the hum of the vent, the distant click of a light switch that no one touched. I wasn't imagining it, or maybe I was, I didn't know anymore. My skin felt too tight for my body. I kept checking my phone, waiting for news of the witnesses, waiting for someone to say, "They're okay, just a misunderstanding." But no one did. The next morning, courtroom lights flickered like the bulbs were trying to warn us. The gallery buzzed with whispers. Someone said Diddy had been late entering the building. Others said he never left the holding room. When he did finally walk in, he didn't acknowledge anyone, just shuffled to his seat and stared straight ahead, blank as marble. But then I noticed something. Every day since the trial began, he stared at one spot in the room. Not at the judge, not at the jury, not even at his own team, but at a corner of the wall up high near the ceiling, a spot with no significance. No clock, no screen, no camera, just a vent. A tiny black slit in the plaster that hummed softly if you got close. And he never blinked when he looked at it, never looked away. What was he seeing? My eyes followed his line of sight until I felt dizzy. I blinked hard and looked back down at my lap, at my folded hands and the court program I kept creasing into soft folds. I didn't want to stare at that vent anymore. I didn't want to know if something looked back. As court was dismissed again, no new testimony, no official explanation, I waited for my turn to exit and turned to look at the jury box. Most of them looked tired, frustrated, but one woman, a teacher I think from the way she dressed, had her eyes fixed on the same vent. Her hand gripped her notepad so hard it shook. And then she looked at me, just for a second, like she wanted to ask if I saw it too. By the time I got back to the hotel, my head was pounding. I sat on the bed, shoes still on, coat bunched under my back. I wanted to sleep, just one night. 1 hour without dread curling in the pit of my stomach. Then my phone lit up. Airdrop request. No name, just a file labeled Interview 11, Witness J. Baldwin. I hesitated, my thumb hovered over Accept, and then I pressed it. The file saved to my phone. I didn't open it, not yet. I just sat there staring at the screen, the weight of everything pressing down. The missing faces, the bathroom mirror, the red mark, the symbols, the vent, the silence. I knew I would read it eventually. I had to. But I also knew whatever was in that interview, once I opened it, I could never go back. Chapter 5, The Paperclip Incident. There's something different about the way the air feels when fear is shared. You can smell it like copper and antiseptic, sharp in the back of the throat. That was the courthouse on the morning court resumed, 2 full days after everything fell apart. On paper, it was a brief recess to reorganize counsel. In reality, it was a scramble to plug a hole in a dam that had already burst. I could tell the moment I stepped into the gallery. No chatter from the press bench. No hushed court small talk. Just the sound of air conditioning that hummed like it didn't want to be there either. The new face at the defense table didn't inspire any more confidence. Young, too young. Late 30s maybe, hair greased back in a way that felt performative. His name was something like Mallow or Marrow, a junior associate from an entertainment law firm that handled trademarks and cease and desist letters for influencers. Not the kind of man you throw into federal criminal defense at the 11th hour. He looked like he hadn't slept. His suit was off the rack and slightly too large, like he'd borrowed it from a cousin for his first job interview. I noticed the sweat soaking through his underarms even before opening statements resumed. It spread down the sides of his ribs like tide water, darker with each passing hour. His hands shook when he spoke, shuffling papers he clearly didn't understand. Twice he asked for breaks. The judge both. The prosecution barely masked their disdain. He was drowning. Everyone could see it. And then there was Diddy. He sat too still, not the kind of courtroom composure you expect from someone trying to appear in control. This was different. Controlled, yes, but not by him. He stared straight ahead, not at the jury, not at the judge, not even at his own defense. Just ahead, unblinking. He hadn't spoken a word since court resumed. And when that midday scuffle broke out over a mislabeled piece of evidence, just a courtroom clerk tripping on a cable, causing some paper stacks to go flying, it should have been a forgettable disruption. A ripple, but Diddy bent to pick up a pen that had rolled under his chair. A pen I don't even remember him using, and that's when they fell. Paper clips, 4 of them silver and plain, but one was twisted. I didn't notice it at first. It wasn't until he stood again and one of the clips bounced toward the gallery aisle that my eyes locked onto it. It had been bent deliberately, into the unmistakable shape of a fly. Wings, body, antennae, crude but deliberate, and not random. I knew that shape. I knew it too well. My cousin used to draw them, not butterflies, not ladybugs, flies, over and over in margins and across pages, swarms of them. She said they weren't just bugs. She used to whisper, "They're the ones that watch when no one else does." We laughed about it once during a thunderstorm when the power went out, but her eyes didn't laugh with us. She always drew them last, after writing something, after blacking something out. They were the final layer, her final thought, the last thing left behind. And now one had fallen from his pocket. I reached for my phone, hands clammy, adrenaline surging like a sharp cough at the base of my spine. I steadied it on the courtroom pew, zoomed in, and took the shot. It clicked, or at least I thought it did. The screen went black, dead. My battery had been at 63%. I know it had. I didn't think, just tucked the phone back into my coat and looked up again. But the paperclip was gone. One of the junior clerks had already scooped up the rest and handed them off to a bailiff. They didn't even glance at it. I barely heard the rest of the proceedings. It all passed in a dull haze. Something about financial disclosures. Something about dismissed motions. The new defense counsel stuttered through an objection that made no sense. At one point, the judge had to remind him which exhibit folder he was referencing. I couldn't look at him without imagining him melting under the overhead lights. When the court recessed for lunch, I stepped outside to call my brother. My phone powered on but flickered oddly. The screen glitched, colors inverted, icons stretched into static. I finally managed to open my gallery. My photo wasn't there. Instead, the last photo showed my face. just my face, but not the way I'd expected. It was blurred, distorted, like a warped mirror, cheeks melted downward, eyes fogged over in with lines that didn't match the shape of my skull. It looked like I was screaming, but I couldn't remember making that face. I never took that photo. I deleted it. I told myself it was a bug, a glitch. Phones do strange things under pressure, right? Maybe I accidentally triggered the front camera. Maybe my lens fogged up, but deep down I knew what it looked like. The distortion wasn't random, the shape was insectal. Later that afternoon, during another stalled testimony review, I sat with my uncle and two others from the families in the back lobby. One of them, whose niece had also filed a civil suit, got a call. She didn't recognize the number, but she picked it up anyway. I'll never forget her face. Her mouth dropped open, but she didn't speak. She just held it there like she was listening to someone she didn't want to hear. Then she dropped the phone. I picked it up and hit speaker before it went to voicemail. The voice was mechanical, not a real voice, not human, like something filtered through static and water. It said, "If he speaks again, it won't be just lawyers who vanish." Then it clicked off. Looked like she'd aged 10 years in 10 seconds. She clutched her chest and muttered something about last time. I didn't ask what she meant. None of us did. When I brought the phone to the bailiff, he didn't even pretend to be surprised. Just stared at the screen, then back at me. He didn't ask who called, didn't ask what was said. He just whispered, "They already know." And then he walked away. That was it, no report, no logging, no check-in with courthouse security, just those 3 words, "They already know." I returned to my seat like a ghost. I don't remember the rest of the day. At some point, they passed around documents for review. The judge asked if there were any pre-witness objections. The junior defense lawyer tried to raise one but lost track of the legal terminology. The prosecution didn't even bother to object to his incompetence anymore. It was too obvious. The room was unraveling, not just the defense, the entire courtroom, like no one wanted to admit what they were actually seeing. At the end of the session, I looked up at the vent in the corner of the room. The same one Diddy kept staring at. Every day, same time, always just as the court took its second break. I hadn't paid attention before, but now I watched. He glanced up at it again for just a second. His mouth didn't move, but I swear I saw his throat shift, like he swallowed something that didn't go down. And behind that vent, nothing, just an air duct according to the layout. But I couldn't shake the thought that something in that room was feeding on the silence, on the discomfort, like a presence in the drywall, not watching the court but using it, wearing the trial like a skin. That night I didn't sleep. My phone stayed on the charger, but I didn't touch it. I couldn't. I was afraid of what might show up on the screen or what might call. I opened my cousin's old notebook again, the one I'd kept since her memorial. On the back cover, in faded pencil, she'd drawn one final fly, just one. Beneath it, a sentence. "If it falls from his jacket, don't look too long." I don't know how she knew. I don't want to know. But I believe her now. Chapter 6. Sealed Exhibits and Unsealed Intentions. The courtroom was quieter than usual that morning, like even the walls were holding their breath. Maybe it was the weather. A thick, muffled gray had rolled over downtown since sunrise, and every window in the courthouse looked dipped in fog. Or maybe it was the envelope, that black envelope. It hadn't come through the usual evidence courier. No badge check, no paper trail, just appeared there on the front desk of the clerk's window, like it had grown out of the wood. A single item inside, a matte black flash drive with a red label reading, Deposition Room 3, full footage. The font wasn't typed. It was scrawled, handwritten, shaking like the person who wrote it had been cold or scared, or both. I only found out about it because the clerk's assistant, the one with the nose ring and chipped blue nail polish, looked directly at me when she opened the envelope. I don't know why. I wasn't standing close, wasn't making a scene, but she looked right at me and froze. Her hand hovered over the drive like it was a live wire. I knew it then. Knew it in that moment. Whatever was inside, it wasn't supposed to be there. Not on that day, not in this trial, not in any earthly room where people still believed in logic. Prosecution called for an emergency review. That's how I knew it wasn't a prank. You don't halt federal proceedings because of a random drop. The district attorney's assistant whispered something to the judge, and suddenly we were all ordered out. The gallery filed into the hall like confused cattle, murmuring, shifting, checking their phones for updates that hadn't hit the feeds yet. I lingered near the vending machines, waiting. I wasn't sure for what. Maybe for the earth to crack, maybe for the ceiling to sigh. 40 minutes later, they let us back in. But before the judge even said a word, I caught sight of the monitor screens. A new file was queued. Deposition 3, Excerpt A, that was all it said. No names, no context, just a ticking bar at the bottom waiting to play. The judge spoke as if trying to sound stern but distant, like someone who didn't want his name attached to any of this. He said we would hear a redacted portion of a deposition for contextual purposes, and that we should refrain from drawing premature conclusions. He looked straight at the jury when he said that, not at us, not at me. The screen flickered, the footage started. Diddy sat in a chair, arms resting on the table, posture loose but rehearsed. A man clearly off camera asked the standard legal prompts. Name, date, confirmation of legal representation. Diddy answered them in flat, steady tones like reading lines he'd rehearsed. But about a minute in, something shifted. You wouldn't notice it if you were just watching casually, but I've been studying his mannerisms for weeks now. This was different. He blinked too slowly. His fingers, which had been idly tapping the table, suddenly stopped. Then, without prompting, he said, "The congregation under the floor, they're still humming." The room froze. You could see the deposition officer lean forward off screen. "Excuse me," he said. Diddy smiled, but it wasn't real. The left side of his mouth curled before the right, almost like the timing was off. "The floor, it's hollow. You ever listen close enough to your shoes, they tell you who's underneath." The judge stopped the video there, claimed it was outside scope. But too late, we'd already heard it. And some of us, those of us with loved ones who'd never made it back from the floors of that man's homes, we knew exactly what he meant. But I didn't hear the worst of it in that courtroom. That came later. I had left early that day, said I had a headache. The truth is, I couldn't sit through another round of legal theater knowing what I just heard. So I ducked out before closing statements and walked back to my hotel in the cold. When I got to my room, there was a text from Lacey, my journalist contact, waiting. Just 4 words, "You need to see this." The file she sent was encrypted. No subject line, just a file and a single sentence below. "This is the uncut version." I don't know how she got it. I didn't ask. All I know is what I saw. The same footage began playing. Same setup, same room, same man, but this time there were no cuts. No silences inserted where words once lived. About 6 minutes in, everything unraveled. Diddy's voice mid-sentence fractured, not cracked, not broke, fractured. 1 second he was saying, "I only ever needed," and the next he was finishing the sentence in a voice that wasn't his. Higher pitch, breathier, like something mimicking human cadence but not quite landing it. "Just needed time," the second voice whispered. I sat up, rewound, played it again. The same thing. "I only ever needed, just needed time." And then he started laughing, but it wasn't timed with his mouth. The audio and visual didn't match. His lips would open and no sound came out. Then a laugh would echo across the room, too loud, too slow, too wrong. I watched the tape 3 times before I had to stop. My palms were slick. I don't remember breathing. My cousin used to talk about this kind of thing. She called it the voice behind the voice. When we were kids, she once told me she thought certain people didn't have real voices at all, that something else spoke for them through them. I didn't believe her. I do now. The next morning, I couldn't focus. Court was back in session, but I couldn't think about witnesses or objections or evidence. I kept hearing that double voice in my head. I told myself I'd get a coffee, just something to snap me back into the physical world. The bathroom line was long, so I ducked into the one down the media hall, a place few of the public ever used. Inside, the stalls were mostly empty. I took the one at the end, sat for a moment, no one else in the room, silence, until I noticed the note. It was taped to the back of the stall door. Plain white paper, black ink, no fancy font or calligraphy, just one sentence. The attorney heard him speak in the language. I didn't breathe, I couldn't. I ripped it down. My hands were shaking so badly I dropped it twice before I stuffed it into my coat. I flushed the toilet out of habit. My feet felt like weights dragging across the tile as I rushed out. Outside, the world looked unchanged, like people were still living in time. But I was. I texted Lacey, told her what I saw. She didn't reply, but when I reached the courtroom, something stopped me. Another note. This one was taped to the back of the courtroom monitor, the one the judge used to review evidence before it hit the screens. Same sentence, same ink, same kind of paper, but no one saw who put it there. When the clerk found it, he told the bailiff, who just shrugged. "Wasn't there this morning," the clerk muttered. "Wasn't there this morning." The bailiff didn't even react, just took the note, folded it, and slipped it into his pocket. I don't know what language they're talking about. I don't know who or what spoke it. But something inside that deposition room wasn't meant to be filmed. Something wasn't edited out of the tape. It was recorded on purpose. And now it's spreading, through drives, through speakers, through ink on paper and voices in walls. That night I couldn't sleep. My hotel thermostat flickered between 72 and 61 degrees every 15 minutes. I unplugged it. It kept flickering. Around 3 a.m., I heard footsteps outside my door. I waited. They didn't stop, just circled, slow, measured, never knocking. I got up at dawn, packed my bag, but I didn't leave, not yet. Because part of me knows this trial isn't about verdicts anymore. It's about containment. And someone or something is losing control. Chapter 7. The gallery stared back. By day 7, something in the courtroom had changed. It wasn't in the air exactly. It was in the way the light bounced off the marble floors, in how the chatter before court felt hollow, rehearsed, like someone had handed the gallery invisible scripts. I sat in the second row, behind a family I didn't recognize, watching as the spectators filed in one by one. There used to be reactions, sharp intakes of breath when new evidence was introduced, murmurs when the prosecution paused for dramatic effect. But now the gallery just sat, still, watching, not a twitch, not a whisper, just fixed stares pointed forward. A woman 3 seats to my left didn't blink for at least 3 minutes. I started counting. 61, 62, and still her eyes bore forward unblinking. It was like she wasn't watching the trial, she was waiting for it. The first time the court's sound system distorted, it happened when Diddy opened his mouth. He wasn't even testifying, just muttering something under his breath, something about a folder or a name. But the microphone near the bench crackled like a dying radio, emitting a low warble that made my fillings ache. You could feel it in your molars before your ears even registered the sound. A sharp pulse of white noise surged through the speakers and then stopped. The judge banged her gavel, irritated. "Technical delay," someone mumbled, but it happened again only when he spoke. By midday, the audio engineer requested a private sidebar with the judge, and I caught a sliver of his whisper when he passed. "It's not electrical. It's coming from inside the room." He looked pale, like he'd seen something he couldn't explain. I watched him unplug and every cord with a trembling hand. There was a man in the front row I hadn't noticed before, middle-aged, short haircut, gray windbreaker. He looked like someone's uncle, nondescript, forgettable. But then I noticed his fingers. He had a paperclip in one hand and a dull metal object in the other, maybe a key or a coin. Slowly, methodically, he began carving a circle into the wooden bench in front of him. It was precise, deliberate, a perfect ring with symmetrical teeth all around the edge. Not jagged teeth, geometric. Like a saw blade, it looked ritualistic. I leaned forward slightly, trying not to draw attention, and caught a glimpse of something else carved into the inside of his palm, matching marks. My stomach turned. I tapped the woman next to me. "Did you see what he's doing?" She blinked once slowly and then turned away like she hadn't heard me. But I know she had, she just didn't want to see it. During the afternoon session, a juror collapsed. It wasn't theatrical, just sudden. Her pen dropped to the ground, her eyes rolled back, and she slumped sideways. Bailiffs rushed to her and the court recessed immediately. She came to minutes later, whispering something. I didn't catch it at first, but one of the nearby court reporters murmured. She said she saw herself standing behind her own chair. I don't know what that means. I don't want to know what that means. But the way the room reacted. Like this wasn't the first time something like that had happened. No gasps, no panic. Just silent acknowledgement, like everyone already understood this courtroom didn't belong to the living entirely anymore. That night I tried to sleep. I wanted it to be over for the next morning to come clean, sterile, rational, but I dreamed. I dreamed of her, my cousin, the one whose name I haven't said out loud since the indictments began. She was sitting across from me, wearing the same hoodie she wore in the photo we used at her vigil, the purple one with the bleach stain near the cuff. We weren't in a room, we were separated by something that looked like glass but pulsed like skin. She tapped the bench between us with her fingers, tap, 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 3 beats, then pause. Her lips moved but no sound came out. I tried to shout her name, but the air wouldn't carry my voice. Behind her in the shadowed gallery, rows of people sat watching. Their faces were blank, smeared like wax sculptures left too long in the sun. One leaned forward and pressed a finger against the glass. I woke up gasping, drenched in sweat, the side of my neck sticky from tears or something else. I couldn't tell. My phone was on the floor, screen up. I hadn't touched it. I reached for it cautiously. No new notifications, no calls, but the voicemail icon blinked. I hadn't opened it in days. I tapped it. One new draft, unsent, unrecorded. The timestamp said 3:13 a.m. I don't remember touching my phone at that time. I pressed play. Static at first, then breathing, not mine. Rhythmic, slow, almost too slow for a human. Then a voice, familiar but twisted, like someone wearing a mask of someone I knew. "Now we start," it whispered. Not shouted, not threatening, just stated, like a fact. Like a bell being rung to mark the end of something. I dropped the phone and backed away from it like it was on fire. The room dimmed, just slightly, but enough to notice. The bedside lamp flickered once. Then again, I unplugged it. Didn't matter, the bulbs inside still flickered. I whispered a prayer I hadn't said since I was a teenager and shoved my phone under the bed. Maybe it was a glitch. Maybe I'd fallen asleep watching something again. But I knew that wasn't true. I hadn't played anything that day. And my phone's camera roll showed a screen recording I didn't take. It was 6 seconds long. It showed the courtroom, my seat, and Diddy, sitting unmoving, staring directly at the camera, but the feed was from behind me. The next morning, I walked into the courthouse more slowly than usual. I wanted to pretend everything was fine, that my mind had invented the fear. But as I stepped into the gallery, something about the way the spectators turned their heads, almost in unison, just a few milliseconds apart, confirmed what I already knew. The gallery wasn't here to watch justice. It was watching us, measuring us, deciding who would walk out whole. One of the court artists approached me during recess. Her charcoal-stained fingers trembled as she held out a sketch. "I drew this during the morning session," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. It was a sketch of the courtroom, yes, but the figures in the gallery had no eyes, just voids, black sockets, and each had a symbol on their forehead, a circle ringed with teeth. I asked her why. She said because that's how they looked when he started whispering. I asked her what she meant. She looked past me, eyes locking onto something over my shoulder. Her face went blank. "They're listening." She walked away and left the sketch behind. I didn't touch it. Back inside, the judge called for order. Diddy was present but silent, his head cocked slightly to one side, as if hearing something the rest of us couldn't. When the prosecution read a portion of sealed evidence that had accidentally been transcribed into the court record, the sound system pulsed again. One man in the gallery clutched his head and screamed. He had to be escorted out. His shirt was soaked with sweat, and his fingernails had torn skin from the underside of his palms. The rest of the spectators remained still. That night I didn't dream, or maybe I did and just wasn't allowed to remember. My phone didn't show any new drafts, but when I opened my photos, one new picture sat in the folder, taken at 3:13 a.m. once again. It was the back of my own head. And next to me, the blurred silhouette of someone sitting in my room, watching. Chapter 8, the statement never made. The courthouse was quieter than usual that morning, but it wasn't peace, it was paralysis. Even the flag outside didn't move. No flutter, no shift. Just still, like the air had been pressed down by something too heavy to name. When I stepped out of I noticed it immediately. Fewer security guards at the entrance, but each of them stood stiffly like they'd been told to stay still or else. My bag passed through the scanner with no beep. Nobody looked me in the eye. And for the first time all week, no stood behind the gates, no cameras clattered, no voices rose to chant for justice or scream for Diddy's head. There was just silence, and a hollow hallway that swallowed footsteps like a throat swallowing secrets. Inside the main courtroom, we were told to wait. For how long, no one said. The bailiff mumbled something about procedural instability, but when pressed, he just repeated it again like it was a spell he couldn't break. I looked around. The gallery had thinned. A few familiar faces, other families, journalists, a clerk I trusted were absent. The lead prosecutor paced near the bench with papers clutched tightly in her hand, lips pursed and face drained of all color. On the bench, the judge's chair sat empty. His robe was draped neatly across the back like it had been removed in a rush. No one sat in Diddy's chair either. His junior attorney lingered near the defense table, but he looked even more lost than usual, staring at his own shoes like they might give him instructions. That's when my phone buzzed. No notification sound, just a silent, persistent buzz that vibrated through my coat like a chill. The message had no contact name, just a file attachment titled, "Statement of Conclusion, prepared but unread." I should ignored it. Every instinct in me screamed to. But curiosity is louder than fear when you're this deep into a storm. I stepped into the hallway, heart pounding, back to the wall just beneath the fire evacuation map. The file opened as a PDF, white text on black background. No court seal, no signature, just cold, blank words that felt like they'd been waiting for me. 3 lines were highlighted in pale yellow. The witness threats extend beyond the physical. The attorney's last memo stated, "We are not defending a man, we are defending a mouth that speaks for something else." I will not read this aloud. To do so may complete it. I read it once, twice. A third time, my hands trembled by the end. These weren't just sentences, they were decisions. Someone had made a conscious choice not to speak these aloud, and now they were in my hands. I didn't know who sent it, or why, but the weight of it sat heavy in my coat pocket, like I'd been handed a loaded weapon without instruction. When I returned to the gallery, a paper notice had been posted to the courtroom doors. Session DELAYED indefinitely. No explanation. No new date. Just a red-inked signature from the administrative clerk and the seal of the federal judiciary stamped beside it like a final nail in something nobody wanted to bury yet. The families gathered quietly, confusion painting our faces in shades of fatigue and quiet dread. I overheard snippets. They're hiding something, another motion. He's not in the building. Nobody said Diddy's name, not directly, not anymore. The power of it had shifted. He was no longer a person. He had become an atmosphere, something that seeped into the vents, bled into the microphones, pressed down on your shoulders whenever you tried to speak. I left the courtroom without saying goodbye. My boots echoed through the marble corridor, each step sounding louder than it should. At the corner, the final one that led to the elevator, I hesitated. My eyes drifted to the spot where it had all started on day one. The elevator doors were open, but I didn't hear the usual ding. No movement inside, just a pale woman standing at the edge, her body half lit by the dim, flickering bulb overhead. It was her, the woman from the elevator, the one who whispered that cryptic warning, "He won't speak today," the mouthpiece ran. She hadn't aged a day. Still in that same slate-gray coat, her hair in a low bun, hands folded neatly like a librarian waiting to be asked something impossible. But this time she wasn't whispering. She was holding something. A manila envelope, thick, sealed with a wax emblem I couldn't recognize, some kind of knot or maybe a spiral. She didn't offer it to me. She just held it steady as if to say, "You already know what this is." I asked her, voice barely rising above the hum of the flickering light, "What's inside?" She smiled, not kindly, not cruelly, just knowingly, like I was the punchline to a joke only she remembered. Her answer chilled me to the marrow. "The next one," she said. "He wasn't the first." I didn't ask her what she meant. I couldn't. My legs moved before my brain caught up, and I turned down the stairwell instead of stepping into the elevator. I didn't want to be alone in a box with her. Not again, not after everything. Outside, the air felt denser. The sky had no clouds, but no color either. Just that washed-out gray that makes you feel like the day forgot how to be alive. I walked aimlessly, the statement still open on my phone, the yellow highlighted lines burning behind my eyelids with every blink. What did it mean? To do so may complete it. Complete what? A ritual, a summoning, a binding contract no one had the courage to sign aloud. Was the judge afraid, or had he simply seen too much? My phone buzzed again just once. Another message. No text, just an audio file titled "Courtroom Closing Audio Alt." I pressed play. The feed was silent for the first 5 seconds. Then footsteps, the rustle of paper. The judge's voice, low and strained, began to speak, but stopped halfway through the first sentence. A second voice bled through. It was layered over his, not replacing it, but sitting on top of it like a double exposure. Not an echo, not interference, a presence, something speaking through him, not instead of him, with him. It said, "You heard him, we needed time, and now it is finished." The file ended there. I dropped the phone, let it hit the sidewalk. I didn't care, I couldn't feel my fingers. Somewhere in the distance, I swear I heard a fly buzzing, but when I looked, there was nothing there. Not on my coat, not in the air. Just the manila envelope still etched into my memory, and the woman's voice, that same smile, that same phrase. The next one, he wasn't the first. And now, walking home, I keep thinking about that last sentence in the statement. To do so may complete it. But maybe she was wrong. Maybe by reading it, even silently, I already did.